Welcome to the NRC for In-Home Services Engaging Fathers in Child Welfare in Home Services webinar. Today's conference is being recorded. At this time, I would like to turn the conference over to Cynthia Peterson. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mar. Greetings, everyone. My name is Cynthia Peterson, and I am the Out-of-Home Care and Youth Program Manager for the Child Welfare Information Gateway. And I'm also the Project Coordinator for the NRC for In-Home Services. On behalf of the NRC for In-Home Services, we want to welcome everyone to today's webinar. We want for the next 90 minutes, we want to provide you with some practical and useful information as well as some inspiration to continue your efforts to engage fathers in in-home services. Before we get started, I want to go ahead and turn it back over to Mar, who will cover the logistics of today's webinar.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be conducting question and answer sessions both over the web and over the phone lines throughout the conference today. Instructions will be given at that time. And now I'll turn the call back over to Ms. Peterson for our next speaker.
Great. Thank you. Our first presenters are from Children and Family Policy Advocates, and it's a consulting firm offering research, writing, and strategic guidance on child welfare, juvenile justice, and adolescent and child health issues. Lisa Pilnick is the co-founder and director of Child and Family Policy Advocates. She focuses on child welfare and juvenile justice policy and practice. Lisa was previously a staff attorney at the American Bar Association Center on Children of the Law, where she worked on grants related to non-resident fathers and the child welfare system. And presenting with Lisa is Jessica Kendall. Jessica is also a co-director and founder of Child and Family Policy Associates. She was previously assistant staff director at the American Bar Association, where she managed grants related to father involvement in the child welfare system as well. Both of these ladies have published materials, trained attorneys, judges, and other professionals, and presented in numerous conferences on the topic of fatherhood engagement. Our next set of presenters are from the National Fatherhood Initiative. As Vice President of Project Design and Consulting for the National Fatherhood Initiative, Eric Vassir has developed and implemented the National Fatherhood Initiative programs and initiatives across the country, including 24 Dads and Dr. Dad programs. Since 2002, Mr. Vassir has trained thousands of facilitators to lead various fatherhood programs and has provided technical assistance to hundreds of organizations that improve program quality and effectiveness. He works closely with local community and civic leaders to create a continuous stream of programs and other resources to meet the needs of fathers and families nationally. From the Parents and Children's Together program, we have Sue Haney and Bill Perry. Sue is the Early Childhood Program Manager at Lourdes Hospital in Birmingham, New York, and she has, for over the last 20 years, been working with children and families in mental health and prevention programs. Bill is the Healthy Families Supervisor for Parents and Children Together Home Visiting Program at Lourdes Hospital. Bill has successfully developed the PACT Fatherhood Program, which began in 2003. Now I will turn it over to Lisa Diano, the Project Director for the NRC for In-Home Services. Lisa?
Hello, thanks, Cynthia. On behalf of the NRC for In-Home Services, I'd like to welcome you all. I'd like to say we're really excited to see the kind of response we've had to this webinar. We had over 500 folks register. So that shows the growing interest in engaging fathers in child welfare, and we're so happy to have you join us. The National Resource Center for In-Home Services is a relatively new service of the Children's Bureau Training and Technical Assistance Network. We were funded 3 years ago to serve as a national center of expertise on in-home services, child welfare in-home services focusing on keeping kids safe in their own homes. And as we all know, the fathers have been sort of an afterthought in the child welfare system. And in-home services in some ways have been an afterthought in the child welfare system. So we're tackling two things at once here. we're very happy that the Children's Bureau funded a Quality Improvement Center on non-resident fathers in the child welfare system. And their focus, as you'll learn from listening to Eric and Lisa and Jesse, was primarily about children in the foster care system and non-resident dads. But they have some learnings that are really important for us as we focus on engaging fathers up front. Also having Bill and Susan with us represents the other side where really there have been great advances in engaging fathers, and that's in the area of family support and early childhood education. Organizations like Healthy Families, like Parents as Teachers Together, and especially Head Start and Early Head Start have been doing some wonderful things to engage fathers. And so we're bringing all that together today to begin really a journey with you to explore how to engage fathers at the front end of a child welfare case. And this comes from a strong commitment on our part to family-centered services and a belief that in order to keep kids safe and to promote their permanency and their well-being, every single member of the family needs to be engaged, and we need to work to get that family to work together on behalf of the children. So I'm very excited that what we're going to be able to present to you today is going to help us all as we think about how to make that transition to really bring fathers into the circle of family-centered practice. Next slide, please. So how this is working for us at In-Home Services, and what we want to do is promote early efforts to engage non-resident fathers in a variety of programs, and we've listed those up here in the slide. Not only prior to child welfare involvement, but also family preservation services and services to prevent placement for children who are in the child welfare system, and we want to keep them either out of foster care or once they return home to stabilize that placement. I asked Jesse and Lisa to steal a little bit of the data from their presentation because I thought this would be a good way to kind of focus us on the role of the non-resident fathers in maintaining children safely at home. What we have is some specific studies that are recent that are finding some very exciting information, and I want to just go over those statistics with you. Children who had contact with a non-custodial parent in the last year were 46% less likely to enter foster care. And this is a study of children who had touch with the child welfare system. For children who have gone into foster care, involvement by their non-resident fathers is associated with more reunifications and fewer adoptions, which points to us to the importance of doing the work up front so that we can make sure that this involvement can be nurtured during foster care time if necessary. Higher levels of non-resident father involvement are associated with a substantially lower likelihood of later maltreatment allegations. I just can't emphasize how important that is because I think there's been a sort of a general, maybe even unspoken fear that if we engage non-resident fathers, we might be running into issues around maltreatment. And the data on this now is coming in of a substantially lower likelihood, which really supports our notion that the family-centered approach can work to keep kids safe. And then finally, that children with highly involved non-resident fathers exited foster care more quickly. So the investment that we can make up front, even if foster care is necessary at some point, is really important to bring children back home safely and to achieve permanence with their families. Okay, our objectives for today are to give you information about innovative programs to effectively engage fathers involved in child welfare in-home services and to provide you with helpful resources. And to start out then, I'd like to turn this webinar over to Lisa Pilnick. And Lisa and Jesse will talk about engaging fathers in child welfare services, the why and the how. Lisa?
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Lisa Pilnick, and I'm going to be speaking for the next few minutes, and I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Kendall. We wanted to share a little bit of the research on fathers with you. So if I can just get to the next slide. Here are some very basic statistics about fathers, and these are not specific to child welfare. And the main one I just want to call out here is that last bullet. Over a third of children just in this country, not specific to child welfare, don't live with their biological fathers. So if we can go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit more about children who actually were involved with the child welfare system. And these statistics are specific to children who had been in foster care, but it would be my personal assertion that these numbers would actually be a little bit worse even for if you're just looking at the in-home services population or the prevention population, because if you think about it, once sort of foster care and the courts become involved, some of the father's legal rights are triggered. So when you aren't even sort of being concerned with that, there's even less of, an obligation to involve the father. It's still just as important, but you may actually see it being done even less. So this study was done in 2006 by the Urban Institute and funded by the Department of Health and Human Services. And they interviewed 1,200 caseworkers in 4 states. The states were Arizona, Massachusetts, Tennessee, and Minnesota. And they asked them about 2,000 children. And they asked them sort of what contact or what they had done with the fathers in these cases. And so the reason that it's shaped like a funnel is because the numbers really start to go downhill. So in almost all of the cases, 88%, the agency knew who the father was. The caseworker answering the question said she knew who the father was in the case. But in only a little bit more than half of those cases had the caseworker actually contacted the father, or did she have in her notes, or did he or she have in her notes that someone else in the agency had contacted the father. And then in slightly less than a third, the father had visited the child. And then the last statistic here, 28% of those fathers had expressed interest in the child living with him. That's 28% of the total number of cases, even including those ones where they didn't have any information for the father. So if they looked at the number of the fathers who were contacted, it was actually 50%. So half of those dads said they would want to be a resource to the child, even to the point of taking custody, and a larger number said they would want to have other types of contact with the child, including visiting. And really quickly before you can see the next slide, but I just wanted to point out that 3 of the 4 statistics that the other Lisa shared with you earlier were actually from a follow-up study that looked at these same kids in these same cases. So all of those statistics that Lisa was talking about how much better children fared when their fathers were involved, those were from the same set of cases. They just looked at the same cases later on. So if you, we can go to the next slide now, thank you. If you look at pretty much any major indicator that people like to talk about when they're thinking about well-being or risk or quality of life for children, you can pretty much find a statistic on how important dads are and how bad it is for children on any of those indicators if they don't have their dad involved in their life, and how good it is for them if they do have their father involved. So some of the statistics here talk about how children are 5 times more likely to live in poverty if their father is not living in the home. They're more likely to do poorly in school, to have emotional or behavioral problems, drug abuse. And again, these are general statistics, so there's a statistic here about these children are 2 times more likely to be abused or neglected, and that's out of the whole population, not just those who've had some sort of child protective services involvement. And children are also more likely to become involved in crime or to commit suicide if they are from a father-absent home. On the flip side of that coin, children whose fathers are involved, and I would like to sort of stress here that even though the first column of numbers talk about the father not living in the home, the second set is actually just talking about fathers who are involved in their lives. So even if they are not custodial or not residing in the home, just being involved in their child's life has a great impact on them. And so they have better cognitive outcomes, they have better self-esteem, they have better grades, they're less likely to have drug and alcohol use, and they have a better prosocial behavior. So if we can go one more slide. And this is just some general things about how important fathers are to children, but I think especially with children who are involved in in-home services, having more support, having more connection to the father side of the family. I mean, the reason that these in-home services are necessary is because the family is struggling. And so to the extent that you can have a father who can contribute, whether it's money or time or diapers or, whatever things the child needs, or, asking more about homework, those things are very helpful. And then also, it's not just the father that we talk about, but the father's whole family. So some of the things we talk about is the informal support and resources and the family and cultural connection, but also the statistic Lisa mentioned earlier about there being fewer maltreatment reports. Well, that's because you've now got the father and his whole family being involved in the child's life and seeing if something is going wrong. If maybe the services that were in place are now failing for some reason and something needs to be adjusted, having more people involved in that child's life can really help you identify that as an issue. So the next slide, and I think we just need to load the bullets under there. Great. The next slide is one that's sort of very dear to Jesse and I want to give you just a little bit of background about where it comes from. As part of some work that we did on 2 publications, which are the sources for that document. I'm not sure why that bullet isn't there. Okay. Well, actually, the document is also in the resources section, so I can talk about it a little bit more then. But as part of the work that we did putting together 2 different guides, we worked with foster youth alumni or empowerment groups in 3 states, and we surveyed over 100 current and former foster youth, and we asked them different questions about their fathers. And so the documents that these quotes are from, and again, I'll direct you to them a little bit later in the presentation, have a number of quotes like these and also some actual numbers about what the youth said in response to questions about their fathers. But, I think that these quotes that we've pulled up and put on the screen kind of cover some of the major reasons that it's important to reach out to dads and have them involved in these services. So youth feel that every kid has a right to know their father. For males in particular, they can feel that, this is the quote from one of the young men who answered our survey, having a male as part of your life is a big deal. There's just a connection that a father and son have that cannot be replaced. The youth said that he thought that advocates should try their best to make sure that there's a connection with a son and a father. And I'm going to skip to the last quote because I think that's also a really important one for this audience. One of the youth told us, I think that once the state gets involved with children, fathers tend to stay away. So that's why it's important for service providers to work on keeping fathers involved with their kids. So again, later on the resources slide, I'll give you an actual link where you can go to pull up the documents that those are from, and there are a lot more quotes and sort of information in those as well. And I'd like to turn the slides over to Jessica Kendall.
Good afternoon, everyone. Lisa spent a couple minutes talking to you about what some of the research says about the importance of father engagement. And what I'm going to do is spend a couple minutes telling you what research has shown about what some of the barriers are to engage fathers in child welfare cases. And a lot of the research kind of falls into one of a couple buckets. There is sort of high-level, agency-wide, systemic barriers that make it difficult sometimes for fathers to engage early and then ongoing in a child welfare case. And then there's barriers at the caseworker level, which vary anywhere from not being able to access certain services to some of the caseworker's own concerns about the father before them or their own personal issues that have kind of come to the fore and affect the way that they might work with the men in their cases. And then there are issues around the father's own circumstance or the relationship that the father and mother have that might make it difficult or prevent him from being engaged in the process. And so what some of the studies have suggested, as you see on this first slide, is that at the high level, historically speaking, child welfare agencies have been primarily mother-focused. And that's in part because, and this is particularly true in-home services, because oftentimes when you go into the home, there's one parent, and the custodial parent is more often the mother than the father, and the father is non-custodial. And so when you're working with just that one parent and trying to maintain that household, oftentimes the non-custodial father isn't as engaged. Sometimes child welfare agencies are hesitant or are concerned about involving fathers, particularly ones who might have a history of violence or domestic violence, because engaging them could in some ways compromise the mother's safety or the child's safety. And this is particularly true if there hasn't been a lot of training or assistance and support provided to caseworkers on ways that they can safely engage a father who might have a history of violence. You can go to the next slide. Those same studies have also suggested that there might be certain experiences that some caseworkers bring to the table that might prevent them from seeking out a non-custodial father or any father to engage them, which might relate to a general distrust of men or fear about reactions that the father might exhibit to certain situations that could be violent or negative. And then there are issues that relate specifically to the father and his own circumstance that research shows are additional barriers that the father and agency might face when engaging him. For example, the father might live not even just out of state, he could live on the opposite side of the city or county, making it difficult for him to participate in the day-to-day activities that go along with the case. And in some instances, and this probably comes up often with new fathers or teens, very young teen fathers that have very little or no experience with children, and there's this sense that he's non-custodial, he's very young, he doesn't have the capacity to parent, so we have to get him up to speed so that we even feel comfortable engaging him and letting him participate in his child's life. Next slide. So there's a fair amount of research that talks about the relationship between the mother and father and how that might also affect the father's engagement in a child welfare case. And this is particularly important in in-home services because, like I said before, in many cases you are working closely with a custodial mother and the father is not living in the home. And so what those studies have shown is that the relationship between the father and mother is absolutely key to engaging the father. And the reason, some of the barriers that keep the dad from being engaged, some of them relate to some of the things we spoke about before in terms of fears of safety and domestic violence, but many of them also have to do with wanting to protect the father from certain circumstances. So some fathers might be undocumented immigrants. The father might have an outstanding arrest warrant. You can go to the next slide. Or there might be some informal arrangement between the mother and the father in terms of child support that the mother doesn't want to disrupt because if a formal child support order were to come into place, she might actually get less from the father. And so with all of these barriers, though, I just want to, you can go to the next slide. I just wanted to remind folks that there's significant possibilities in terms of involving fathers, and that was one of the largest emphasis behind the Quality Improvement Center on Non-Resident Fathers, which Lisa Duanu mentioned earlier. And that was a 5-year project between 3 entities, one of which was the American Bar Association, where Lisa Pilnick and I both worked on this project. And in our first year of the project, we spent a lot of time looking at literature and conducting focus groups and interviews of different professionals who work in child welfare to assess sort of the landscape of father engagement in child welfare. And we did several interviews and focus groups with child welfare professionals to get a sense from them about what they viewed as some of the biggest barriers to fatherhood engagement in child welfare. And what they said really echoed what some of the research was telling us. And so what you see here on this slide and the next is a list of the top barriers that child welfare professionals identified when we spoke with them. And so lack of training, unfriendly fatherhood environment at the agency level, lack of interagency collaborations between primarily child support and child welfare to help identify and locate fathers. Many child welfare professionals suggested that their agency policies and procedures didn't help them identify or locate or contact fathers, and in some ways may even have inhibited their ability to locate fathers. Some caseworkers suggested that they were reluctant to contact fathers for a variety of reasons. You can go to the next slide. Some of which related to domestic violence or their own personal issues that might have prevented them from fully engaging dads. There was many caseworkers who talked about the relationship between the mother and father and how if it's a poor relationship, the likelihood of being able to engage the father, particularly if he's non-custodial, was always difficult. And then there was discussions of many of these other factors that you see that were really mirrored in the research. Anything from not knowing who the father's identity is to the mother and father wanting to protect informal support arrangements and fear that that might go away if he becomes involved in the child welfare case. You can go to the next slide. And so with that, Lisa and I hopefully have given you a sense for where the research is in terms of engagement and then barriers to engagement. And I guess we'll open it up to any questions at this point.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, you may ask questions over the web or over the phone lines. For web questions, type your question via live chat. For phone questions, please press *1 on your telephone keypad. If you are using a speakerphone, we ask that you please pick up your handset to ask your question. Once again, please pick up your handset before posing your question. Please be aware that a voice prompt on your phone line will indicate when your line is open. At that time, state your name before posing your question. Once again, *1 for questions, and we'll take our first caller. Your line is open.
Hello, this is Nelson Salazar from Somerville, Massachusetts. And it's interesting that within these barriers, they didn't address the economic status of fathers, fathers that had to work 2 jobs. I wonder why that is.
No, that's an excellent question. And I think that in some ways it speaks to the research that's available. And there isn't actually a whole lot of research out there on fatherhood engagement, specifically in child welfare. And so what we were sharing with you here is certainly not the full panoply of barriers that fathers might face when engaging in the child welfare process. What it did represent, though, is what research thus far has told us about what some of the significant barriers are. But certainly, anecdotally speaking, we can't deny the importance of economic or job or educational background of the father as a potential barrier to engagement, as well as many other barriers that we might not have listed, but as I said, weren't discussed in the research. Just from my own, we didn't share this as much, but like I have represented children and families in child welfare cases for many years, and one of the biggest barriers to engaging fathers oftentimes was reliable transportation, be able to take time off of work to either participate in meetings or visits. And so certainly your suggestion is right on par in terms of a pretty big barrier to engaging a lot of fathers.
And this is Lisa. Actually, there is one statistic that I'm happy to share with you because we've put it on a bunch of our other sets of slides, and there's only so many minutes. But one statistic that's from that same book, Father Facts, that the National Fatherhood Initiative put out, and it's a bit old at this point, but it says 20% of all non-resident fathers are estimated to earn less than $6,000 a year. And so that's just totally backing up what you say. And then when we ask these fathers and we say to them, well, the child welfare system is starting to get involved in your life, and we want to see that you're committed, and we want you to go to this service, and we want you to do this, and then we want you to also make some payments. We have to be realistic about the fact that, fathers can't pull down jobs and necessarily attend services that are offered 9 to 5, and that's why with in-home services it's so important to be flexible about when you're scheduling them, to offer transportation vouchers. A lot of the fathers programs that we've worked with give either gas cards or bus tokens to people so that they can attend the different sessions, but that is a great point. And it's definitely one we try to make. For example, when we talk to judges, we try to put some of that in there so that we say when you're saying that a dad needs to do something, you need to keep in mind all of the different limitations on his time and his energy. And so that's a great point to put out there. Thank you.
And moving to our next caller, your line is open.
Hello? Hello?
Please go ahead, caller.
Okay, thank you. Actually, one question is a technical one. The staff that I have here are asking whether the very informative slides that you're providing us with, whether they'll be available to us. Can we copy these online or?
Thank you so much for your question. Actually, yes, the slides will be available for the participants who registered before the webinar. They have already been sent and will be in your inbox.
Okay.
Otherwise, you can check the NRC for In-Home Services website,
Okay.
and they will be posted on the website for you to download there.
Thank you. And my second question is having to do with queries. It's a question that's come up pretty frequently here. I'm a DCF area program manager, and oftentimes we find that fathers who we've been able to engage and get involved in the process find that their queries really end up they're being used against them in terms of them being able to access resources, employment resources in particular. I was wondering whether there was any thought given to whether that system is being considered for any changes.
Can you describe a little bit more what you're talking about with queries? I think you may just be using a term that's specific to your state.
Oh, I'm sorry. The queries are background checks, criminal background checks, yeah.
Great, sorry. Every state has sort of different terminology.
Sorry.
Oh, no, that's totally fine. So that is an issue that comes up a lot, and actually when we talk a little bit later about some of the resources that the Quality Improvement Center produced, a lot of them did focus on fathers who either were incarcerated or had some sort of criminal history. I don't know personally, and Jessie can chime in if she does, of any sort of large-scale attempt to deal with that. I think that more what happens is as local fatherhood programs or states sort of recognize that it's an issue, they figure out different workarounds. And so, for example, the Texas Quality Improvement Center site was noticing that a really large percentage of their dads had protective orders against them because in Texas the way that you would get one was almost standard in a lot of court procedures. And so they had to sort of come up with a plan that they could be able to serve these dads because previously they were not allowed to serve dads, under this certain rubric with those orders. And so I think that because I don't know of anything nationally, the better thing to do may be just to sort of look to how some other localities that have faced similar issues have dealt with it. And one of the things that we're going to share on the resources slides are some different states that have had fatherhood initiatives and are doing a lot of work on those, different types of father involvement. So I'm going to put that up there for now if Jessie has anything to add. Otherwise, I think also if any of the people listening have dealt with that in their own jurisdiction and want to let us know how they've dealt with it, we could then share that information, that knowledge back out to the group.
And we'll move to our next caller. Your line is open. Caller, your phone may be on mute. We're not able to hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'm Frank Williams from Akron, Ohio, Fatherhood Initiative, Man to Man. And I was looking at these programs that you're talking about, engaging fathers. We're already doing this. We've been doing this for 2 years now. We have our Fatherhood Initiative meetings inside of Children's Services, and we have one of our guys that work in Children's Services to engage the fathers. And we have identified about 80 to 90% of the fathers in the last year, up from 30%. And our program is just working great. And the CEO of the program is John Sarvers, and Jean Bennett and Ann Reams are the ones that are very responsible for getting the Fatherhood Initiative practitioners into the building and just working with the families. And we have a 90% engagement right now.
Well, that's great to hear. Do you mind sharing with me your state again?
This is Ohio, Akron, Ohio.
Akron, great. And if you've got a website for your program that you want to share with the group, I'm sure that they'd be happy to hear that, or we can send it out afterwards.
Well, my program, I have my website is basically for my scholarship program, but I also have Fatherhood Initiative under it. But our program is a Williams Challenge Fatherhood Initiative Man to Man, and we have a 8-week program. We have like 8 weeks, and then we take 2 weeks off, 8 weeks, all year long. And what we do is we take the fathers in and we engage them, and we kind of tell the guys how important it is for them to be connected with their children. And believe it or not, this works. And I tell you, our outcomes are just fantastic. And we also give the guys gas cards and bus passes, and we also feed them pizza dinners when they come to our meetings. And these guys, they're wonderful, and they want to be with their children. But nobody has ever gave them a chance to talk and to be engaged.
Well, this is Jessie. Sorry, Lisa.
No, I was just going to say we've heard that too. That it's so important to provide both transportation, but also food, and we really appreciate your sharing that with us. It sounds like you're doing pretty similar work to what the 4 Quality Improvement Center sites did, and so I think everyone is really interested in hearing about your initiative. We'll share some more information about sort of similar work that's going on in other states a little bit later in the program. Jessie, did you have something else you wanted to say?
You can go to williamschallenge.org.
No, I was just going to say it's wonderful to hear how high your percentages are and your outcomes are. I think one thing that a lot of states are struggling with is actually engaging the dads. So like you saw in the statistics earlier that Lisa Pilnick was talking about, while a high percentage of fathers are identified, the engagement piece is what becomes very difficult for a lot of jurisdictions, and that's certainly reflected in state CFSRs and their PIPs too, a lot of which are beginning to look at how they can better engage dads. So it sounds like you're ahead of the game.
But what we do, we have collaborations in our program. We have collaborations with Children's Services, Domestic Relations, Job and Family Services, the court systems, and the University of Akron workforce. And we all collaborate together to work for a common goal of connecting the guys with their children.
And thank you so much for your comment, but we are going to have to move on to the next set of presenters. So thank you so much for your question.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Jessie and Lisa, for your great information and those great questions, and we will be following up and providing some additional information, especially on that program. And I would like now to turn it over to Eric Masseri, Susan Haney, and William Perry, and they're going to talk about the 4-step development model. Eric?
Yeah, thank you so much, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on which time zone you're in right now. I am really fortunate to be co-presenting this section with Susan and Bill of the Lourdes PACT program, because they are truly a great case study in illustrating what it takes to successfully implement this 4-step development model. And I can say it ain't for the faint of heart, to use a bit of a slang term there. but the benefits, however, far outweigh the effort, as you will see as we go through this presentation at this point. So next slide, please. The 9-step development model, which I recategorized under 4 for today's webinar, also came out of the QIC project, the Quality Improvement Center on Non-Resident Fathers that has already been talked about in some of the earlier parts of the webinar. And so I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail there. If you go ahead to the next slide. Essentially, the goals of this QIC-NRF project were to promote and support a research-based and outcome-focused approach to inform best practices in engaging non-resident fathers and paternal family in the public child welfare system. Essentially, the project was a research and knowledge-sharing project, to kind of sum it up in one statement. Next slide, please. So this is the 9-step development model that was designed to help child welfare agencies engage fathers more effectively. You can see it's pretty comprehensive. The one thing that could be misleading about this is kind of using this as kind of a step approach rather than an integrated or systemic approach, because as you'll see, even when we go through the 4 categories that I've recategorized these under, that there is definitely some overlap, and one of these assessment areas will affect others, and so it is designed in this way, I think, to kind of help us get our minds around it a little bit and to break it down into more understandable, attainable ways to look at areas that we can become more father-friendly in our agencies. But you can see that it's very comprehensive, from leadership and organizational philosophy to program management, policies and procedures, organizational community assessment, and the rest are on there as well. I won't go through all of those. And there's a link there as well that I have included for you. If you would like to take a closer look at the specific things to consider under each of the 9 categories, there are some really good points on even strategies and tactics that you can look at that link. So for purposes of this webinar, we have recategorized those 9 categories under these 4 broader ones that, frankly, the other 9 fit very neatly under. So these first 2 are on their own slide because they are foundational to the others. Really, everything happens or doesn't happen based on your organization's leadership and organizational development. So leadership development focuses on influencing the attitudes, beliefs, and values held by the organization's employees at all levels on the importance of serving fathers. So kind of getting at, that driving force behind the culture of the organization really kind of flows out of that. And then the organizational development is simply the nuts and bolts of an organization, and how do they ensure that it carries out its mission through their policies, procedures, and processes, staff development and training, and even with the physical environment. The next 2 on the next slide, program development, is the foundation of an effective program that relies on quality staff and resources and effective strategies to recruit and retain fathers. And then community engagement is the ability to engage the communities, increase awareness, because as you help make the community more father-friendly, that's going to help everybody out, all the way down to the fathers and families. So what I'd like to do is turn it over to Bill and Susan so that they can give you some background and some context on their organization before we dive into those 4 categories a little bit more.
Hi, this is Sue Haney. We work with Our Lady of Lourdes Memorial Hospital in Binghamton, New York, which has 49 different services, 18 sites. We are the Lourdes PACT, Parents and Children Together. We've been around since 1989. We are accredited by Healthy Families America for 2 sites in 2 counties, and we are going for model fidelity with parents as teachers. Our funding comes from state fundings through Healthy Families in New York and Broome and Tyler counties. We have a federal grant. We're part of a federal grant, Safe Schools and Healthy Students. And we have a local funding through Broome County Child Protective and Mandated Preventive Services. We have the programs. I want to talk about Impact, which is the local funding one. That is the fund. We engage children ages 0 to 10 years, and they're referred by our child welfare system. They can be in foster care or at risk of foster care. And when we get in the first referral, we always talk about the father. We always want to see how the father's involved and how we can get the father involved. It's the small funding. We serve about 30 families at a time. Right now, we've served 48 year-to-date. Our fatherhood advocate, we have a fatherhood advocate, a full-time fatherhood advocate, a full and a part-time parent educator, plus a part-time supervisor in this program. He's working with 24 families out of those 48. 10 of those fathers he sees individually, working with just the father, and the 14 they're working with the parent educator and the fatherhood advocate, work together doing home visits with both parents. We see the parents in supervised home visits or supervised visits that might not be in the home if they're just starting to get their kids back. We have had 2 children return home this year, and 3 are scheduled to return in December. 2 of those 3 are going to individual fathers, one of whom came out of jail before we started just as we started working with them. And 40 children remained in-home out of placement. So just what they were saying about working with the dads is showing how that is working with us also. We are proof of the research. Next slide. Oh.
Okay. I'd like to highlight just some of the most important ways that you can make your organization father-friendly in this first category under leadership development. And again, I'm looking at this category more from a broader kind of a 30,000-foot perspective. Sue and Bill will provide specific examples from their setting. But the first thing I want to emphasize about this section on leadership is that, no matter what your role is in your organization, or whether you have many direct reports or none, you all have influence. And ultimately, that's what leadership is. I mean, leadership is influence. And each of you on this webinar, I'm kind of looking at as being, potential change agents around engaging fathers in your setting. It sounds like there are a number of you that are already kind of pioneers in that as well. Again, no matter where you are on that continuum, that just looking at this as another potential way to, add some tools to your belt. So here are a few considerations. Do the leaders in your organization remain flexible in creating, promoting, and delivering and evaluating client-directed efforts? You'll hear some examples related to the Lourdes PACT program in a moment, so I'm not going to really unpack that too much. The second one, does your mission or vision include serving dads? And I mean, specifically, I might even suggest if you have in your mission statement things worded like children and parents or children and families, to even take a look at potentially breaking that out to specifically state children, moms, and dads, so that you can be intentional with dads. And what we found is the more intentional leaders are in those efforts, the more successful they are in actually drawing the fathers out of the shadows, be it in the families or in the community, to those resources. Also, mothers and fathers critical to child well-being. And why is that so important? One of the things that we did at NFI is we conducted a large survey on fathers' attitudes about fathering called POPS Culture, which controlled for all social, economic, race, and age variables. And one of the biggest things that leapt out at us was this thing that we've now termed the replaceability factor, because 53% of all the fathers that were surveyed said that they felt they could be easily replaced by mom. But the kicker was that 57% of these fathers believed that they could be easily replaced by another man. And so that really, struck us as really central to even the motivation on whether a father is going to go that extra mile to try to be the best dad he can be, or to build his fathering skills. Because if he believes that, maybe he's nice but not necessary, that's going to undermine everything from that point on for that father. Next slide, please. So, for that reason, it is critical that leaders encourage the healthy development of the father-child relationship and the development of the father-mother relationship, whether, they're going to be intimately engaged again or not, really just so that they can come together and co-parent with the best interests of their children in mind. One of the dynamics we're now seeing nationally is that, programs are getting much more effective and efficient recruiting and retaining fathers. And these dads are learning to be better dads. They're understanding their important role in their child's life, and they want to get more involved in their child's life, but are running into barriers with the mom. And so, we've now begun to develop tools to help moms raise their awareness of the important role that dad has in her child's life. As you saw in one of the previous slides, mom can be the gatekeeper, or the flip to that is mom can also be the gateway, in situations where that's appropriate. I mean, we have to also not be naive about some of these situations, but in the majority of the cases, these are great opportunities for us to embrace. Next slide. And finally, under leadership development, just a willingness to seek funds to implement father involvement activities. And, I recommend even working with your grant writers or your development team to include some kind of line item or funds in every proposal that would have some father-specific tools and resources built in. Because there is clearly a father factor in just about every social ill we can think of. And it's critical to weave fatherhood into the fabric of your organization to avoid those starts and stops that can happen if you're only offering fatherhood services when there's specific funds for it. So let me turn it back over to Sue and Bill so they can discuss some specific leadership tactics that they use in their setting.
Thank you, Eric. We look at the leadership development, and as you stated, you need to be flexible in your leadership and in the development of your program. When I first came on and was hired for the PACT program, we had a group model. We'd gone through, done a lot of the research, and we were looking to reach out to fathers. Within the first few months, we found that our process of reaching out through a group model did not work very well. So we went back to the drawing board, looked at some more research, and did some investigation by talking to the families that we were working with and talking to the home visitors that were going into the home. At that point, we decided that we were going to go into the home as a tandem visit, where we would send a fatherhood advocate, a male fatherhood advocate, and a female parent educator into the home. All of a sudden, we started realizing that with sending the two of them into the home like that, we started having fathers come out of the bedroom, come out of the garage, be at the visit, and they started coming out and they really wanted to hear what we had to say. We also realized that this was the best way to help promote that father-child interaction. By having the male fatherhood advocate in the home, it kind of gave permission to that dad that it was okay to get down on the floor and to play with the child and to interact with the child. And this was the very start of our program. So then we had to get into some buy-in by other people. It first started with Ascension Health, and Sue's going to talk about that initial buy-in.
Well, Ascension Health really was before Bill, because Ascension Health gave us the money to fund Bill. I had read a lot of research about the importance of fatherhood, and I have a strong belief in that. So I wrote a proposal for the mission award through Ascension Health. Ascension Health is a group of Catholic hospitals and Catholic health associations that Lourdes is a part of. That was where I got the money to first start to hire Bill. And after we hired Bill, after I hired Bill and started working with him and started getting results, we took it to the Broome County Department of Social Services. They gave us some funds, included that in the funds they were given, added a fatherhood advocate so that that would be included. We already had a grant with Healthy Families New York for Broome County, and I started to work with them and talk about how I wanted to have a fatherhood advocate as a line item in that grant, and we were able to do that. And then afterwards, a few years later, we were able to get a Healthy Families New York grant with Tioga County, too. And Tioga Health and Human Services, part of Tioga County, we met with them, and they definitely bought into the whole idea of having fatherhood involvement as part of the whole program. We then took it on to different presentations to parents as teachers and Healthy Families and Prevent Child Abuse at conference, too.
And currently, we're in the process of going through the Healthy Families America accreditation process, and it was one of the aspects that they really liked of our program, of how we've integrated the fatherhood advocate into the home visiting and how we work with that. Next slide, please. Some of the transitions in those early days were challenging, and as you said, we talked about leadership development. One of the things that Sue did in the beginning was ask me to kind of just keep track of what was going on within the office, and I did that for about a week or two, and then I presented out to a whole group of female parent educators, which was an interesting situation with being the only male in the group, and just tried to point out to them some of the things that they said and different words and stuff that they spoke throughout the day that caused me to be a little uncomfortable at times, and they didn't even realize that they were doing it. Fortunately, really thick skin, and it worked well. The other thing, when I started going out into the homes with the parent educators, they kept referring to their families as mine. That's my family, which is wonderful that they have such a connection with the families that they work with. And we had to move that from my family to our family. Once that transition finally started, I will always remember one of the parent educators coming to me and going, you know what, it's not bad having you there. It really does make a difference in the home visit, and that'll stand out to me forever. So the tandem visit really became our model that we were going to do. Recent practice, we've changed that a little bit. When we are looking to hire people, our interview questions have father-focused questions in them. We talk to them about how they interact with different people within the community, whether it be mothers or fathers. We also kind of highlight different outcomes that we've had. Currently, we have about a 60% father involvement in the home visits that we do, which is something we're quite proud of. It's very high. Also, we have over an 80% participation of fathers of those that live in the home.
One of the things about when we had that meeting, when Bill started to say what he was hearing and what might be seen as uncomfortable language in front of a male, it was really interesting. The women who were working at the time really took it well and like, oh my God, I said that or I said that. So it really had us all really looking at this and paying attention to how we are coming across to fathers.
And lastly, the other thing that we found is as a Healthy Families program, we do an assessment ahead of time, and that's been our most recent change with leadership. Our assessment worker tries very, very hard to have both the mother and father at that initial assessment, and it really sets the stage for what we expect of the families, that it is a program designed for both mom and dad. And we'll turn it back over to you, Eric.
Hey, great. Thank you. So you can see, practically, taking these bullets that I'm kind of tossing out there and translating that into something that works in your unique setting is really where the rubber hits the road. And for our next category, and I'm actually going to try to abbreviate here just in the interest of time because I want to make sure that Bill and Sue have as much time as possible to kind of share their piece of things. But organizational development would be the next category, and these are just some examples of things to consider. As you think about things under your organizational development category, policies, procedures, and processes. Don't leave any stone unturned. From your intake or processing forms to address mailings to fathers as well as mothers, even though it can be very challenging to get and to keep their contact information updated. Again, that could be something that you try to build something into it to address that as well. Encouraging fathers to shape existing and new programs, that's something that we see that's consistent among the best programs out there, is just continually surveying the fathers to help them shape the program and actually have more ownership and buy-in to the services and programs that you're offering. Referring fathers to community programs to meet their other needs, certainly a no-brainer. Next slide. Now, some agencies have formally added an assessment of how their staff has engaged fathers, right into their annual performance reviews. I mean, there's an actual assessment matrix, for them to evaluate that, and that certainly can help change the culture a little bit as well. I want to just focus on the fourth bullet, in terms of organizational development. Is staff trained on the differences between fathers and mothers, different styles, on average in terms of communication and parenting styles? Dr. Kyle Pruitt has done a lot of research on parenting styles between moms and dads and found some interesting differences. On average, moms hold their babies 9 out of 10 times in different positions. Usually it's in a nurturing position towards the body. Dads hold their babies 10 out of 10 times in different positions. And, moms tend to use external objects to play with their children. Dads are the objects, typically. Dads are 3 times the distance away from their children when they're trying something new. As an example, on a playground or, climbing something, monkey bars or whatever. They're usually 3 times the distance away from the children than moms are. Still watching, still there, but just giving them a little bit more, of that healthy risk-taking where mom might be more nurturing. So, not different, not better or worse, but just different, right? And children benefit developmentally as a result. Next slide. What does your physical environment look like when dads come in? Again, this is elementary, but do the facilities include reading materials, videos, other resources that appeal to men? Do the images say that men are welcome? And are there spaces that can encourage father-child play interaction? So let me turn it back over to Sue and Bill to share what they did in this area.
Well, this is one of the other things that we looked at. Our parent educators and fatherhood advocates really focused on doing the visits as a family structure. When we would start the initial call, we would expect that mom and dad were going to be available for the home visit. With many of the situations, they would tell us, that dad is not available. And sometimes we had to take that and we had to just do the visits with the moms. But when we started it out with the voicemails, the letters, we always addressed both the mom and the dad. We talked about it being a program for both of them, and we really wanted them to be involved with it. That was the easy part. The next part was the forums. All of a sudden, we had to really start looking at all of our forums, making certain there was a place for both the mother and the father to sign on it, that we were collecting information on both of them. With some of our grants, the information collected did not necessarily need to be done for the fathers, but what we did as an organization was we collected that information the same for both the mom and the dad. Because we actually had fathers say, so why is it you need all the information for her but not for us? So it was really the dad speaking up and saying, we want to be involved. The other thing that we did was when we do that contact, we had our parent educator and our fatherhood advocate do the call literally at the same time with each other. They would both be talking on a speakerphone to the family so that they could set the stage that this is for everybody and that there would be a male and a female there to represent them in the home visiting program. The other thing that we did is we have some of those situations where there's a non-custodial parent. We would work together as a parent educator and a fatherhood advocate to make certain that when the parent educator was calling the mother, the fatherhood advocate was calling the father and giving the exact same information to both of them. That way we were reaching out to them at the same time and there was no preference. As Eric said before, mom can be the gatekeeper, but she can also be the person to put you on track to that dad. So we would work at both directions. If mom really wanted the dad involved, it was amazing how often they would reach out to him and say, hey, this person's trying to get a hold of you. It's about our child. And we would use her as a tool to get in that door as well. Next slide, please.
As far as the training that you talked about and how each of us parent differently, males and females, we use that every day in our work, every day. We do it in trainings for new staff. We do it just in our home visits, watching the mother and father interact differently and pointing it out. Wow, that's how dad does it. You do it differently. And that's great, and you're both teaching them different things, and that's important. Because a lot of times, my way is the best way, telling them that, as Eric said, that it's different, it's not better, and both are very valuable.
Also, we had to look at balance of work. When we started hiring fatherhood advocates, it was a new phenomenon for many of them to realize that as an organization, we also encouraged them, if they had a sick child at home, that it was okay for them to take their time off. Many of them had found in previous jobs that that was not the case. So it was really a whole staff development to get to that way. And at this point, we'll turn it back over. We'll also try to move things along for a time. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, great. I'm going to just continue with the next category, which is program development. And, you'll see that the 4 assessment categories are interrelated and do work as a system, since program development reflects some of the things I touched on in leadership and organizational development categories. But it's important to not only offer programs designed specifically for men and fathers, but also, to work to engage them in other programs, services, and events that you offer for parents and families in general. And initially, it's important to have that father-specific service because, unfortunately, many dads see the word, when they see the word parent, they view that as a code word for mom. And, that's something that we can, unpack, take a lot of time on, just on that concept. But, that's why we found that, these being intentional about making sure that fathers know these services are for them is so important. Next slide. These are some critical issues that are important for men, and they're all critical. However, I just wanted to focus specifically on the grief and loss here because, so many programs for men deal with anger, but not necessarily grief. And anger acts as a barrier to dealing with losses. Men, on average, tend to bury their grief under anger. So when we help men deal with grief, the anger tends to melt away. And there may be even a lot of this grief associated with their own father wound, not knowing their dad or having a volatile relationship with their father can be a major barrier for them in their relationships and their parenting as well. So as you're looking at the kinds of things, the topics, the critical issues that you're dealing with under your program development, that would be one that I would pull out here. And then, of course, hire male staff when possible. And Sue, I know that I didn't know if you were going to mention about what you had to do in order to get that, but I thought that was pretty creative as well. Next slide. And then finally, just again, celebrate and recognize fathers' short and long-term accomplishments. That can be a great way to continue to grow and develop your programs. So back to Sue and Bill. They can talk a little bit more about what they've done here.
A couple of the things that we found that we really needed to do was our time of visits. Working with fathers, we did find that we had to start scheduling our visits later in the day. We do many, many visits between 4 and 8 p.m. It works with the fathers. As an organization, when you really want to reach out and contact fathers, you have to work around their schedules. The other thing that we talked about is the enrollment process. That is a precedent over anything else, because if you say it's about mom and dad and then you don't have the fatherhood advocate there, we have found that those families do not tend to connect as well with the program. The other one that we have really focused on is the ability to approach different issues. And this one recently came out to me within the past month or so. I was working with a parent educator, and we were with her and the family, and they were having a little bit of an issue. And the mom looked at dad and said, "Can you assist me with this?" And he said, "No, no, no." And I finally looked at him and I said, "Mom has really stood by you through all these times." And he says, "Well, what do you mean? How about all the legal issues that you've had?" And he looked at her and said, "Never mind, I'll go with you." When we walked out, the parent educator looked at me and said, "And that's why we have a fatherhood advocate, because I could have never have said that to him."
Yeah, I know a lot of times people kind of get their hair raised or something if I say that you really should, fatherhood advocates should be male. And I know that could be controversial. But we have found that really the best way to work with fathers or through males, and the best way to work with couples is to work with a male and a female, because it really works well, because they can see how you interact differently, male to male, female to female, and female to male. It's just a part of life. And sometimes they'll say things like, "Well, we can't afford to hire men." But my response to that is, what is that saying about us as just a society, that it's okay to pay women less? I don't think that's the message we want to give. My creative way, I think that Eric meant, this is what I think he means, is when I put out, with my job description for Fatherhood Advocate, I say experience as a father is a preference, but that's not, I don't necessarily keep to that. And I know you have to interview men and women equally.
Next slide. Lastly, the learning styles, and Eric, you kind of mentioned this a little bit, but what we have noticed in the home visits is that fathers tend to be more hands-on and interactive. Like you said, dad is the toy. The other thing that we've taken notice of is that when we do ages and stages questionnaires and a child drops below the cutoff, we tend to find that those families get their children to early intervention services quicker. And I think part of that is that male psyche, that we want to fix things, so they tend to move quicker to that. And now we'll go back to you for the last section.
Yeah, and Sue, the one thing I was mentioning, that was when you talked about, I think initially when you first put the ad in, if I'm recalling correctly, you had called a parent specialist or something, and then when you didn't get any men to apply, isn't that the time when you changed it?
That was actually me, Eric. I had known somebody that worked within our organization, and they called me and said, hey, this job would be perfect for you. I was working in the mental health field at the time, and I pulled up, and it was a family support worker. And I read the job description, and I said, yep, that's not for me, and that was the end of it. About 2 months went by. That same worker had called me again and said, hey, we have a new position. Why don't you look it up and see if you're interested in it? When I looked it up, it was a fatherhood advocate position, and I read that job description, and I applied for it, and here we are 10 years later. It took me a little bit of time to realize that in the end, it was the same job, just a different title. So it sometimes does make a big difference.
Yeah, exactly. So that I just wanted to highlight that too, because sometimes when we think we've tried, and we're ready to give up, sometimes just persevering to that next step, challenging ourselves, can be the breakthrough. And just want to challenge you all as well on that. If you feel like you're hitting a wall, sometimes you might just be ready to break through and just don't know it yet. So the last category, community engagement. You'll have these on your slide, but again, on the last bullet, using marketing materials developed with input from fathers. It comes back to make sure that you're engaging your target audience in everything that you're developing, everything that you're offering. Get them involved in that as well. Get feedback from them. That can be the best, the best strategy. Next slide. This second bullet was research that came from several sources, including the Quality Improvement Center on Non-Resident Fathers project that I mentioned earlier. But in addition to that, NFI also conducted interviews with fathers across the country, and we learned that fathers are more likely to enroll in fatherhood programs when organizations meet their basic needs. Most fathers do not enroll to be better dads, at least initially. They realize the value of being a better dad after they experience the program. And so consequently, marketing messages that you do should not emphasize being a better dad. It may sound counterintuitive, but being a better dad is the job of the program, not the marketing effort. And just wanted to, encourage you to think about that as well and take a look at your messages, things that you're putting out there, and, look at those basic needs like employment, driver's license, proving to courts they're good fathers, those kind of things. Next slide. And again, here are just some other, suggestions in terms of things to consider under community engagement that relate to press releases around the launch or success of any of your programs, joining or forming a fatherhood task force or holding a fatherhood summit or a town hall. Those are all possible things that you can consider. And I'm going to let Sue and Bill take us home now for our section.
Okay, just to wrap up for our time here, a couple of things that we really wanted to look at is for our community engagement, it really started with Lourdes Hospital and Ascension Health giving us the ability to reach out to different people and then moved on to Healthy Families and the Office of Children and Family Services. We've been very fortunate to have the support of these large organizations to start both at a community level and then really branch out at a state level. And we've often are called upon to talk to other programs throughout the state. And it really started with that 0 to 5 children. And now it's branched out. As Sue stated earlier, we're working up with children up to age 10. And in October of this year, it was even our local school districts that reached out to us to do a presentation on fatherhood involvement. And we went out to the schools and did the Superintendent's Day for them and did a presentation on that. And it's really become quite a movement within our community and our state, and as well as nationally, that really people are starting to see that fathers are a big part of their life.
There's one point I want to make. When they went out to do the training within the schools for the Superintendent's Day, it was our 4 fatherhood advocates who did the whole thing, planned it and did it. And they were planning, and when they're so used to when they present, but they're really usually presenting to more women than men, because that's the kind of people who kind of work in the field. This is the first time they ever went, and most of the people that went to their conference was men. They were shocked, and they kind of just like turned their presentation around, and it really went well, and it was just really heartening to see.
I think at this time, if anybody has any questions for Eric, Sue, or myself, we'll take them at this point.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, you may type your questions over the web by typing in via live chat. For phone questions, please press *1 on your telephone keypad. Once again, if you're using a speakerphone, we ask that you please pick up your handset to ask your question. Once again, *1 for phone questions, and I'll pause for a moment to allow everyone time to signal.
And operator, we only have about 3 minutes for questions, so maybe 1 or 2 questions, and we're going to have to move on in respect of time that we need to end at 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson. We do have 1 question on the phone. Caller, your line is open. Caller, your phone may be on mute.
Hello? Hello.
Please go ahead.
I'm wondering, did anyone do the training of locating and engaging fathers offered through New York State Office of Children and Family Services?
I'm not certain exactly which training you're talking about.
This is the one offered through OCFS in connection with the Center for Development of Human Services?
Yes, we did.
Oh, very good, very good. That's what I was wondering. Thank you.
And our final question. Caller, your line is open.
Hi, this is Rick Perot with Strategies under the Supporting Father Involvement Program out in California. And we've had an interesting issue that sometimes come up with trying to disseminate father involvement for the large majority. The advocates tend to be women outreaching to families. And sometimes there's some kind of pushback from the moms as to, gee, what is this involved, and why is it you're asking about the father and my husband or partner? Have you experienced any of that or creative ways to address that?
Yes, we have, and that's why when we touched upon it briefly, when we make that initial call, we have both that female worker and the male worker making the call at the same time, and we found that when it's a male asking about the father, we tend to get a lot more positive feedback from them, because it is that societal thought process that you have another woman asking about your husband or your partner, or vice versa, the male asking another male about his wife or his partner. So we have found that having both of them do that call simultaneously does help that process quite a bit. Does that answer your question?
I'm sorry, that caller dropped out of our question and answer queue, and we have no other questions.
Thank you very much, William, Sue, and Eric. I'm sorry we had to rush through that. But if you all have any questions specific for Eric and William and Sue, their contact information is on the slide that will be available to you. And now I would like to move on to Lisa Pilnick, who will talk a little bit about resources.
Sure, and thanks. Just due to the time, I'm really not going to have time to go through each of these individually, but I wanted to, first of all, point out that the last resource on the slide that you're looking at now is the one that I had referred to earlier with all of the quotes from the foster youth. So on the next slide, there will be a website where you can find all of these if you're looking to see where those quotes came from. But these first two slides are different materials that were produced by the Quality Improvement Center on non-resident fathers. And since I can't go through them individually, I just want to say that if you kind of look at the titles and look at what they are, they're geared towards specific audiences, but I want to put out there that, even if something was written for attorneys or judges or caseworkers or fathers, I think that there's different things in each of these resources that you can pull from, even if you aren't sort of the one intended audience written in the title. And so I would just encourage you to spend a little bit of time on the website. It's called sort of the toolkit. If you go to the next slide, there's a web address at the bottom there, and what they did was they put all of the Quality Improvement Center materials onto this one toolkit, and so you can see all of the different materials, and there's just a lot of great information on there. So I encourage you to check that out. If you go to the next slide, these are some materials that were not from the Quality Improvement Center, but predated or were just sort of done around the same time. The first three of these are older documents, but they're really just really useful, and that's why we keep sort of trying to push them out there. And then the last one on visits is a more recent guide, and so I think that would be helpful to people as well. And got two more slides of resources if we can go ahead to the next one. These are some state initiatives around family engagement, and so earlier I was mentioning that you can sort of look to what other states have done, and so that's where you can find these. Some of these are specific to fathers, others are family engagement generally, but they're all put out there by either the Children's Bureau or another resource center, so they're pretty national in scope. And then the last two are some specific resources from one of the other organizations, who has been doing a lot of work on fathers. And I thank you for your time. I'm sorry we had to rush a little bit through the resources, but they're all on there, so you guys will all have the slides, and you can go ahead and look into them a little bit more.
Thank you, Lisa. Those are great resources. I encourage everybody to really look into those. I'd like to bring your attention to the next slide, which talks a little bit about the free technical assistance is available to state and tribal systems working to enhance their father engagement programs. If you've identified a need prior to this webinar or as a result of this webinar, you can contact NRC for In-Home Services, and that contact information is on the last slide, to talk about the type of technical assistance you're looking at, and we can discuss that and figure out the best way to offer you that technical assistance. There's a number of training curricula out there. If you're looking for a training curricula, we can also help you in selecting that training curricula. We can also set up peer-to-peer learning. If a state is interested in a program that they've learned about, possibly the Lourdes project or the project the man from Akron was talking about, if you discover things that are really interesting, we can also set up peer-to-peer learning. And the last, but certainly not the least, is the information resources. We can provide a lot of information on resources to states in a non-formal way. It doesn't have to come with an official request for TA. So if you have any questions about that, or if you're wanting to request TA, you can contact the NRC for In-Home Services through me, and I'll be on the very last slide. I would like to let you know that the webinar will be archived on our website, the NRC for In-Home Services website. You have the link there on this slide. The PowerPoint will be there, and also all of the questions that were asked so far will be in a document. If you have any other questions or any questions that were typed in and we didn't get to, and if you have any other questions that you think about once the webinar is closed and you've put some thought into it over the next couple of days and you have a question, feel free to send that question to me, Bonnie Washek at the NRC for In-Home Services. And my contact information is here on this slide. And the information, the PowerPoint should be on the website and the recording of this webinar in about a week. The question and answers will be on there as soon as we get them all compiled with the answers, and they will be posted there then. Cynthia?
Thank you so much, Bonnie. On the behalf of the NRC for In-Home Services, we want to thank you for joining today's webinar. Like Bonnie said, if you have additional questions, please contact her directly. Immediately following today's webinar, we will send out a short online survey and hope that you will take a moment to provide us your feedback. We hope that you learned something new today. This concludes this webinar. Thank you and have a great afternoon.
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's conference. We thank everyone for your participation. And everyone, we are private. Ms. Peterson, we have Bill Perry, Bonnie Washuk, Eric Vasseri, Jessica Kendall, Lisa Pilnick, and Renee Giordano.
So everybody can take a collective sigh, right? The cleansing breath.
Oh my gosh! Eric and William and Sue, I am so sorry that you guys had to rush through your presentation.
Oh, that was okay. Everything was. I mean, it was definitely bang for the buck, I think, for everybody.
Get out your most important stuff.
Yep.
Yes, and this is Cynthia, and I apologize. In the logistics, I needed to remind you all that I would be sending you messages through chat to remind you to move forward or on time and different things like that. And so it looks like most of you received those messages, but I do apologize for not mentioning that before we went live, just to remind you all that that's how I would be communicating with you.